Welcome. Good afternoon. We would like to welcome you to the meeting, which will be devoted to the performance of the Grupa Azoty Group companies in the first half of 2018. I would like to welcome to all of you in the room and also to all our webcast viewers who are listening and watching us live on the internet. The performance of Grupa Azoty Group companies for the first half of the year will be presented by Mr. Wojciech Wardacki, PhD, President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty S.A., as well as President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty Police. Mr. Paweł Łapiński, Vice President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty S.A. Mrs. Izabela Świderek, PhD, Vice President of the Board of Grupa Azoty Puławy. Mr. Włodzimierz Zasadzki, PhD, Vice President of the Grupa Azoty Police, as well as Mr. Artur Kamiński, Vice President of the Board of Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn. I would like to give the floor over to Mr. Wojciech Wardacki, President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty. Welcome to all of you to a presentation which will be devoted to the summary of the first half of the year of 2018. A lot of issues and matters have already been discussed when we presented our performance for the first quarter of the year, during which we highlighted certain events which might appear also in the second quarter of the year, with an impact on the overall performance for the first half of the year. Today we are ready to discuss that summary of the first half of 2018, as we have mentioned before. Looking at the bigger market picture, the first half of the year was a difficult period to conduct business, especially taking into account that a lion's share of our revenue is generated by our fertilizer business. Those market conditions, challenging market conditions, on which Grupa Azoty has no impact or influence, as they are beyond our control, have been, over the years, exceptional. And we will discuss it later. These were certain events which we have not experienced before, especially against the backcloth of prices of certain raw materials. We have not seen that situation before, and our control over those matters has been limited or none. In the first half of 2018, we have seen a number of our corporate efforts. We have discussed them before, some of them at least, during our press conferences, in our press releases as well. I would not like to dwell too much on the details. You can see them, or main events, on that slide. The first half of 2018 have proven that a change, revamping of our strategy and our focus on the second operational pillar, that is diversification of our revenue sources, was a good choice and a good path to take, which enabled us to counteract certain negative effects of slumping economic trends in the fertilizer business. Our efforts have been very wide in terms of their range and impact. In the short term, they are related to certain investments, especially in Polimery Police. We have the president of the PDH Polska plant special purpose vehicle present in the room. Therefore, he will be available to you after the conference to discuss certain details of that particular investment, which will reduce certain risks that the group is exposed to or might be exposed to due to a certain revenue structure which we had before across the group. We are also diversifying our portfolio of products. We're always on the lookout for innovative products in terms of especially our cooperation and partnership with startups. And those efforts are not a newfangled fashion for us. We believe that this is a real need, and we see an opportunity here to be tapped. Therefore, we are focusing on non-fertilizer projects as well, especially in terms of compounding. We have had a number of projects or investments which have already been launched and are in progress. We will discuss their progress as they are being implemented in more detail. We're also talking about 3D and also a number of medicine-related techniques. In that area, we are also actively involved in. Obviously, our ambitious projects require a strong financial muscle. We have built, in the first half of the year, we have built a strong financial and secure financial base for the years to come. We have signed separate agreements with the European Investment Bank, with a consortium of banks led by PKO, as well as with the European Reconstruction and Development Bank. Therefore, that financial muscle and strong financing base with that financial muscle, we'll see a visibility up to 2026 in terms of our financing sources. We are reacting actively and flexibly to the developments in the market, especially in terms of consolidation across the group, and our consolidation efforts are proceeding as planned, especially in terms of the consolidation of our commercial muscle. We signed a number of agreements, especially one concerning specifically corporate consolidation, and moving our corporate center to Puławy formally and legally speaking. That department will be operational for all group companies. We will have a special committee uniform across the group for all main group companies. All those elements related to consolidation of the common policy on distribution channels, as well as flexible reactions to market developments and market threats, as well as supply of fertilizers by companies which are not in line with, generally speaking, fair competition framework, and whose products have been launched and marketed in Poland illegally based on falsified certificates. And they had formulated strong strategies of entering the Polish market unfairly. However, we have managed, in cooperation with our distributors, we have managed to curb those efforts. This obviously required a major flexibility and fast reactions. At the end of the year, most of our distributors were listed on our website with agreed gas prices, and these companies have analyzed their risks and benefits and decided that Grupa Azoty is the best business partner to work with, and not the companies which operate unfairly. Our consolidation efforts proceed as planned. There are no visible threats to that process. We have discussed the effects of the consolidation effort at the previous conference, amounting to 700 million. This has been calculated by an external consulting or advisory company to make sure that an external expert will present those measurable effects of our consolidation efforts. As I said before, this is a necessity and also a need for us to consolidate our sectors, our group companies, in order to leverage synergy effects, to extend our product chains, especially for caprolactam, plastics and polyamides, serving as the best example of those processes. The decisions we have taken a couple of months ago not to extinguish our titanium white business at Police, in line with the previous strategy, as well as certain elements of our plastics business in Tarnów. We have decided not to proceed with those plans, and it turns out that our decision was right, as we have managed to diversify our performance in those areas, setting off certain negative impacts of slumping trends in the economic cycle in the fertilizer business. 10 years of Grupa Azoty Group on the Warsaw Stock Exchange. This is another element that requires a couple of words at least. The group has evolved a lot over the period of those 10 years at the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and we do hope that the years to come will see upward trends as well. And we do believe, and we have announced that before, that we are looking at 15 billion PLN in revenue with diversified revenue sources and limited, reduced risks. In terms of our performance in the first half of the year, the highlights are presented in this particular slide. Consolidated revenue amounting to 4.977 billion PLN. Consolidated EBITDA at 529 million PLN. Consolidated EBITDA without one-offs at PLN 536, and net profit at 124 million. In comparison with our forecasts, only our net result, our net profit, shows certain discrepancies, as the earlier estimates and forecasts amounted to PLN 132 million. And the actual figure stands at 124 million. That difference resulted also from the fact that Grupa Azoty Police received $3 million related to returned share in Afrik SA. This is still an aftermath of the scandalous and negative decision to invest in Senegal. We have managed, however, to offset those negative effects, and we have a measurable effect of $3 million that Police received in terms of detailed information on those settlements with DDG will be discussed by Mr. Zasadzki, Vice President of Grupa Azoty Police. This process is under our control, and the effects in terms of accounting and financials will require a number of steps to be taken, and they will have an effect on the adjustments of our net profit, as you can see on that slide. Net profit loss, excluding one-off items, stands at 175 million PLN. One-offs especially are related to Grupa Azoty Puławy, moving on to dividends paid by the parent company in the group is very interesting. This is a very interesting matter to be discussed, as Grupa Azoty delivers its dividend policy, and we always pay dividend to our shareholders. Some of them only invest in the companies that pay out dividends. The share of individual companies in the dividend generation is obviously varied. Looking at the dividend payment since 2009, we can see since IPO, initial public offering, we have paid nearly PLN 0.5 billion in dividend to our shareholders. In the record-breaking year of 2017, despite a certain economic slump on the market, however, that situation was not that difficult as this year. Therefore, we had a record-breaking year in 2017, and in that particular year, the dividend that we paid to our shareholders was lower versus, for instance, 2012. However, it was partially an effect of our own decision. We decided not to reduce the dividend from Grupa Azoty Puławy. As Grupa Azoty, with the headquarters in Tarnów, receives dividend from Grupa Azoty Puławy, which was historically lowest, at the historical lowest level in 2017. We decided to leave those financial resources in the company, in Grupa Azoty Puławy. Coming back to the key developments in the first half of 2018, we should also mention the publication of our integrated report for Grupa Azoty for 2016/17. It is an important document. I do not need to really explain why. The integrated report includes a number of significant information. I would not like to discuss them at the moment. I will only encourage you to become familiar in more detail with our integrated report for 2016/17, which is in line with the Financial Reporting Board, and it was consulted with an external consulting company. It presents the performance and the developments of the 4 main companies in the group, and also 7 other members of the Grupa Azoty Group. We are discussing in detail our performance and our operational efforts in line with the sustainable growth policy for 2018-2022 and consistent with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. 10 years of Grupa Azoty Group at the Warsaw Stock Exchange. Again, we have shown here that the group has grown over that period, which obviously strengthened our financial muscle. As you can see on that particular slide, there are certain companies in which we hold 100 or nearly 100% share, or we would if we decided to. this will pose or would pose no problems for us as well to be the sole shareholder in those companies. There are a number of ratios. We can discuss their changes over those years as well. The equity grew by more than sixfold. The capitalization amounted to 3.5 billion PLN. This will be discussed in more detail by Mr. Paweł Łapiński. And the structure of our shareholding has also changed. Free float at 26% for our minority shareholders. This is very low and it's very significant. In terms of the stock price, it will be discussed by Mr. Łapiński. I would like to only mention at that point that only a naive, optimistic business in Senegal was an element that had a negative impact on our stock price. You really needed no big imagination to see that this investment is very risky in terms of from whom we bought the shares, what we bought on that market. However, the company was too optimistic in terms of the outlook for that particular project. Objectively speaking, if we look at the record-breaking performance of 2017, we lacked that optimism in that year. And we lacked certain optimism and also certain analysis, more detailed analysis, and the information to our investors as well. Those issues will be discussed in more detail by Mr. Łapiński later on. The situation in our main fertilizer business, in terms of our revenue sources, there are certain companies which are more exposed to certain negative trends certain negative economic trends, especially in Police, where the fertilizer segment represents a lion's share of more than 60%. Those risks are bigger, therefore, at Police, and therefore we are so intent to reduce them and to focus on consolidation. Despite those negative trends, we have managed to consistently strengthen or increase our liquidity due to savings and cost reductions wherever possible. Of course, this is also limited to certain cost barriers which cannot be exceeded. Those exceptional events that I have already mentioned, which have not been experienced by the group before, had an effect of our performance, but due to the diversification and our efforts and steps that we have taken, our business is on the safe side. And the risks which have been analyzed by the major financing companies and institutions that decided to sign an agreement for the financing with the group show that the confidence in us is strong in terms of our cooperation with the financing partners. The stock price, in our opinion, is obviously undervalued and inadequate to the actual value of the group. However, we are calm and composed in terms of the delivery of our strategy. The group is strong and our business is based on very strong footing. Mr. Paweł Apiński will discuss our financial muscle in more detail. I will discuss main elements that impacted the financial performance of Grupa Azoty. In the first half of the year of 2018, we saw similar financial ratios in comparison with 2017. The only exception is EBITDA, which was due to the performance in the chemicals segment. In relation to adverse weather conditions in March, in the month of March. I will come back to that issue later on. What is important at that point is that the remaining segments of the group, especially the chemicals and plastics, they are stable in terms of their performance and also growing, especially in chemicals. We had a breakthrough moment in the first half of the year where the revenue for the agro segment fell below 50%, which is a sign that our efforts are fruitful. So for the first time in the history, in our revenue structure, the revenue generated by the agro segment is below 50%. Let me repeat that again. Enterprise value to EBITDA ratio is shown in the lower part of that particular slide in comparison with our peer group. That is the companies with the same or similar business profile. As you can see, Grupa Azoty stands out versus its peers, which makes us think why, if we have a company like that in Europe with such stable financial footing and such good wide-ranging performance, I do believe that the EV to EBITDA ratio in Europe for that company, for a company like Grupa Azoty, would be much higher. We will, however, against that backcloth, continue to inform our investors of those disproportionate comparisons with the peer group. On the next slide, you can see pretty clearly the negative effects on EBITDA and the sources of those negative effects. The chemicals segment, especially in terms of titanium white, melamine and oxo alcohols, contributed 63 million to our EBITDA. Plastics contributed to EBITDA positively as well. And obviously the agro fertilizers segment, which had a negative effect of 287 million PLN, which includes mainly the cost of gas. But this, however, this is a more complicated issue, and I will come back to it later. Or let us discuss it right now. You can see that the gas prices fell in the summertime and increase during the winter. This year, however, we had two spells of very cold weather conditions during the year, and the market thought that the price trends will stabilize in the month of March. Therefore, the prices of products were reduced in the sector. This, unfortunately, resulted in a big discrepancy between the actual prices of the raw materials and the prices of our products. in the month of April. The cost of ammonia in April was much higher than the selling prices in the market. The market destabilized pretty significantly, not only in Poland but throughout Europe. Everybody expected that the prices will fall afterwards. If the prices are set for the next months in the last days of the previous month, it is very difficult to expect and foresee what will happen with the prices in that particular month. At the end of March, we set the prices for April. But the situation in terms of market trends in gas prices did not change. The same happened at the end of May. We thought that the prices would fall, however, they started to rise again. That situation caught the business by surprise, and also the analysts who are professionally involved in the forecasting of gas prices. We have had 3 adjustments over the year in terms of the gas prices and their impact on our products. This is something that cannot be foreseen. Some of the explanations were related to crude oil, others were related to hard coal. However, we, and the market in general, cannot really explain that situation. All in all, the prices in the months of April and May did not reflect the actual price trends. And those trends still prevail even today. The entire second quarter, practically speaking, saw negative trends throughout Europe on that account. Cold, harsh weather in the month of March eliminated 1 spring application of fertilizers. Therefore, the entire European fertilizer business had an oversupply or overstocking in the warehouses, in the fertilizer warehouses. So the storage volumes were too high, and the market was saturated. Cold weather resulted in faster vegetation when the spring finally came, and farmers did not buy fertilizers at that point. Therefore, we decided to increase our export, and obviously export has lower margins due to the logistic costs. This also had a negative impact on our performance. Our stocks today are slightly lower than the year before, which means that the situation has stabilized. One other chart which will show you and demonstrate to you certain discrepancies versus the benchmark prices. And another negative element, a factor which has or will have a negative impact on our performance. We had dry weather conditions, not only in Poland but also in certain parts of Europe, which slowed down our sales of compound fertilizers. In the drought conditions, farmers changed their buying patterns. This will have an impact on our quarter three performance. On the positive side, however, we had signals that the prices of crops are growing, and the quality of crops is higher. which might offset the negative impact of dry weather spells. As you probably know, our energy costs, or energy commodity costs, are also growing. Hard coal and energy costs are on the rise, as well as CO2 emission allowances. As for Grupa Azoty, we had a multi-annual agreement with a fixed price for energy. Therefore, we were able to mitigate those risks. And the same applies to the prices of hard coal. Therefore, our prices will change only annually. In terms of CO2, the price has increased threefold over 2 quarters. From our point of view, we managed to offset those trends partially with our forward instruments, but we need to have provisions each and every month to be ready for those costs. We are not buying, so the situation here is still open for that particular problem. A couple of words about imports. I am showing here 2 major items, ammonium nitrate and urea. As you can see, imports are still growing, especially from Georgia. However, in other fertilizer groups, we either stopped imports or we managed to cut it down to really low levels. This has not happened by itself. We have worked consistently to deliver that effect. We change our commercial terms with a certain effect of uncertainty for the importers. They do not know for sure whether those transactions will be profitable to them. Until now, we have been too predictable. Right now, we have introduced a certain element of uncertainty, and we needed to change our performance in that particular area. We can see the effects of those changes. This makes us very happy, and we will intently work on that to improve our performance in terms of imports. In terms of the performance by segment, we had a very difficult second quarter with a negative EBITDA in terms of fertilizers at 98 million in EBITDA, with negative trends in terms of revenue. Speaking of volumes, excluding ammonia, which saw a very difficult first half of the year, the volumes in general increased in the first half of the year. This is very important in terms of nitrogen-based fertilizers. The average price or cost of gas increased by 19% versus the first half of the previous year, which could not be offset by the prices of our products. In terms of nitrogen-based fertilizers, the only product group that saw lower volumes in terms of sales was calcium ammonium nitrate. In terms of compound fertilizers, the situation was much different. Potassium chloride is on the rise. And phosphates are on the rise as well. We are struggling here with lower sales volumes, especially in terms of NPK fertilizers. Moving on to the chemicals segment, our revenue went up by 20%, rising to 1.5 billion PLN. And the net profit went up to 217 million. Out of our product groups, we need to especially focus at that point on oxo alcohols, which generated good results in terms of sales volumes and prices and revenue. And our colleagues at Kędzierzyn have managed to have that situation under control, and the effects of their efforts are visible. Melamine and titanium white fared well as well. We also need to, or should, mention another group which is not that big at that point, however it grows very dynamically. We are talking about liquids, Adnox, AdBlue. We saw double-digit increases in that particular product group, especially against the big picture of a slumping economic trend. Some of our revenue sources were moved to technical-grade urea and AdBlue especially. In terms of our benchmarks and deltas, the situation is pretty stable. We saw increases in general for most of our products. One matter deserves a mention. We are talking about diversification time and time again. However, I am talking about it because it shows that this really works. And it had a very positive effect on our performance, especially in terms of the performance of plastics and the chemicals. This year, maybe next year, we will have a positive influence of our agro fertilizers business, all due to our consolidation and diversification efforts. We are making sure that the group functions in a stable manner and in a very balanced manner. We are focusing on our non-fertilizer business. We want to increase the share of that business at the expense of the fertilizer business. Obviously, we do not want to cut down on the volumes of our products in terms of fertilizers, but we need to add certain non-fertilizer muscle in order to make sure that the group functions in a stable manner and is able to respond to very challenging, difficult conditions which are bound to appear in the market. Coming back to plastics, we saw a significant increase in revenue, with EBITDA staying flat, and EBITDA margin fell slightly. As I have mentioned before during previous conferences this year, we have marketed a new product and we needed to reduce margins for new customers. For new customers, because they do not know that new product, we needed to encourage them to buy that product. Obviously, this will be based, the price will be based on price formulas, which will be adjusted year by year. And the plant produces or accounts for more than 80% of our production capacities. So those effects will be delivered faster. In terms of the agreements and the terms of those agreements, they are well structured. The first agreements were signed at the end of the previous year. After the first year, we will see measurable effects of rising revenue. We are always looking at our competitors in terms of our fertilizer business. We are looking at the areas that are growing more dynamically, and we see great prospects for construction, plastics and foils, which include polyamides, obviously. We'll be doing our best to keep up with the most attractive market trends and most profitable, obviously. A couple of words about the market overview for plastics and the prospects for that market. As you can see, the prices are slightly lower year on year. I'm talking especially about the price of benzene and phenol. For caprolactam, the prices of caprolactam varied significantly and fluctuated considerably, especially due to exchange rates, as a lot of those sales were directed to Asia. And as you might remember, the US dollar fared at very low levels at the beginning of the year. A couple of words about the financing sources as a summary. At that point, we have signed credit agreements with 5 institutions. Some of the credit facilities have been already used partially. Some of them have been concluded for 10 years. 6 banks analyzed our outlook and our plans in detail, and they decided to bet on us. We still have more than or nearly 4 billion in credit limits. The net debt to EBITDA ratio is at a very low level of 0.5. As I have mentioned before, a couple of times in 2020, 2023, we will be able to have that ratio at 0.3. In a nutshell, in terms of our investments, we are looking at 445 million PLN. This is lower year on year, which, however, is related to the scheduling, the timing of our investments and the delivery of those investments. We are focusing on Puławy in the first half of 2018. However, looking into the future, we need to remember that our investments will be directed to Puławy as well. If the market situation does not change drastically, we will adjust or revamp our investment plans. The most promising investments will be continued, and less promising investments will be slowed down or extinguished. We will be managing our investments as one of the tools to make sure that our business is on the safe side. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor over to Mrs. Izabela Świderek to discuss the performance of Grupa Azoty Puławy. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to, in a nutshell and synthetically, discuss our performance and add certain additional information in terms of our outlook for the future. The main or key parameters, economic parameters delivered by period are shown on that slide. In terms of revenue, we saw a a nearly 8% increase. However, revenue saw negative trends in general. The negative factors which impacted the revenue at Grupa Azoty in general were visible also at Puławy. There was yet another factor at Puławy which needs to be discussed. We had a wide-ranging program of reconstruction or upgrade of our railway system and of our railway services. We are shifting to road transport, which increases our costs and which has an impact on the product offering from abroad to Poland. In terms of our EBITDA performance, EBITDA is lower year on year. In addition to certain movements on the revenue side, the costs generated based on higher prices of strategic raw materials, that is mainly gas, electricity or hard coal, had an impact on or resulted in much higher costs than in the corresponding periods last year and in the years before. This obviously had an effect on our net profit in the reporting periods. In terms of the highlights, financial highlights of Grupa Azoty Puławy by segment, we had a negative impact of the agrofertilizers business on our EBITDA of minus 92 million PLN. Generally speaking, lower sales volumes resulted in lower revenue, and also the same applies to the prices of most of our agrofertilizers products, which were also falling. This had a negative effect on our EBITDA. To discuss our fertilizers segment in more detail, the structure of our revenue needs to be taken into account. It saw a slight change. More than 50% of our revenue comes from the agro sales. Nearly 40% is generated by the chemicals, and the rest is generated by other segments. That means that our fertilizers business generated most of our revenue at the end of the first half of the year. However, the majority of our products were sold in higher volumes. In terms of concrete products such as urea, as well as liquid ammonia, that generated additional 16 million PLN. Obviously, that performance was adjusted time and again as the selling prices were lower, reduced versus forecast prices. In terms of our chemicals business, the performance stayed rather flat. The chemicals business generated revenue of nearly 700 million PLN. And the factors included higher volumes than forecasted. Despite the prices of certain products were lower than expected, we had a negative effect of 20 million. Melamine added nearly 260 million PLN. Caprolactam, which is our second flagship product at Puławy, generated nearly 240 million PLN at the end of the first half of the year, and urea reported lower trends and generated nearly 130 million in revenue in the chemicals business. In addition to our ongoing operational results and our performance, we need to discuss a wide-ranging ongoing CapEx projects. We planned more than or nearly 400 million PLN in our CapEx projects, of which nearly a half have been already delivered in the first half of the year. This slide presents our major projects and their effect on our performance. We also have a number of projects which will improve our performance in the periods to come, which includes especially the construction of our power plant. We have already received and analyzed bids. Out of 11 bids, we shortlisted 7, and the capex for that particular project stands at 870 million PLN. We are looking at 100 megawatts of electricity and 300 megawatts of heat, and the overall concept of that unit, power unit, has been changed over the year. At that point, we do believe that it will be brought on stream by the end of the year, of next year, of this year. And the final commissioning of that particular unit will take place in 2021. Grupa Azoty Puławy is also has a wide-ranging R&D program broken down into 4 main groups. Group 1 includes the development of solutions for modern farming, and it includes a dozen or so of projects which also have been analyzed by external experts, and some of them received additional financing, among others, from the National Center for Research and Development. Our efforts are focusing on the development of new products or upgrade of existing products, for instance, enrichment of the existing fertilizer products. The second group of our R&D efforts is based on diversification of our business, and the steps we are taking are aimed at the development of certain technologies which will make it possible for us to reuse our waste to the production of new products. Group 3 is the so-called green chemistry or green chemicals. In that group, we are trying to use our products in biotechnological and biochemical processes, while taking even greater care of the natural environment. And the projects under that particular or in that particular group are based often on the partnership with scientific centers or educational institutions. And the last group, due to the rising costs of our strategic raw materials, we are taking great efforts to reduce the energy or material intensity of our production processes, and also we want to change our production parameters, and bring them in line with the growing, more and more stringent requirements of the EU law and regulations. All those efforts are taken consistently across Grupa Azoty and at Puławy in particular, and also by our subsidiaries. Those subsidiaries are also subject, or often subject, to external accreditation in order to become a supplier of products offered to major customers in the market. They need to undergo audits, and those audits were completed and ended with positive effects for 2 companies, and those subsidiaries made it to the group of officially approved suppliers. We need to remember, we need to also take account of the fact that we had a negative net debt figure, which means that our investment efforts, CapEx efforts, and also R&D efforts use our own resources at Grupa Azoty Puławy and not external funding. Thank you very much for your attention. And we will now give the floor over to Mr. Włodzimierz Zasadzki to discuss the situation and performance at Grupa Azoty, Zakłady Azotowe, Zakłady Chemiczne Police. Before I move on to discussing our performance, financial performance, I would like to discuss deconsolidation of Afrig S.A. I need to discuss that particular issue because we have had a number of misconceptions and a big misunderstanding in that particular area. As you might remember, in December we signed an agreement with DDG, which has been modified and annexed since then. On the 30th of May, the shares were returned or retransferred, which means that we are no longer a shareholder of Afrig. This is related to the deconsolidation process, which has an effect on the consolidated financial statements only. In terms of the separate financial statements, the credit facility for which Police and Afrig S.A. were borrowers or co-borrowers, we had a provision for that particular credit facility, and the risk has been consumed or was consumed in previous years. However, that risk was not consumed in the consolidated financial statements, and it could not be, given that those financial statements are the consolidated statements for Grupa Azoty and Grupa Azoty Police. This is a purely accounting exercise, and it does not have any impact whatsoever or on the cash side. If it had not been for that effect, we would have had a different picture and a different situation in terms of our consolidated financial statements. I would like to draw attention to the fact also that our consolidated performance is also lower for another reason. We had Polimery Police and PDH Polska, our subsidiary, and that company is responsible for the delivery of our investment projects. However, some of those costs are purely operational, which are related to their impact on the revenue. PDH Polska will therefore show a negative performance, and it will have an impact on our general consolidated financial statements. Moving on to the particular financial highlights, I would not like to repeat or rediscuss all those matters which have been discussed before by my colleagues. For instance, a major increase in the natural gas prices. The variable costs of gas alone represented nearly 1,000 PLN, around 1,000 plus, versus the costs of ammonia or ammonia prices, if the price of gas is at 100. As you might know, the price of ammonia hovered around 230 to 250 US dollars. That is slightly more than 900 PLN. Therefore, the price of ammonia does not include the price of or overlap with the price of gas yet. This means that our performance at Police, in terms of our financials, was mainly impacted by those trends in the area of ammonia prices. Our revenue in the first half of 2018 was lower by 8% year-on-year, which was due to significantly higher costs and the reaction of the market to fluctuating prices only in the second quarter, when the prices increased accordingly. All in all, our EBITDA margin and the price margin general for our fertilizers was much lower year-on-year. However, despite slightly lower revenue and significantly lower margins, as well as profitability, the total net debt at Police fell, even if slightly, but it did fall. And the debt in general went down, which was a result of a revamped policy in terms of financing. Lower margins, lower costs, lower revenue, and still we saw lower net debt by 40 million PLN versus last year, or this first half of the last year. In terms of our net profit, both separate and consolidated, it is obviously much lower than a year before. However, last year was an exceptionally good year, and our net profit is comparable with 2012, 2013, and is nearly at the level of 2016. That means that our performance in that area is lower, is not that positive, but still those trends are not threatening at all. We also had an effect of deconsolidation of Afrig, and we need to remember that this particular factor had an impact on our performance. A positive effect on our performance came from pigments, titanium white especially, where our margins, EBITDA margin especially, came in at 30%. That business was meant to be extinguished a couple of years ago. Diversify full was a quote by Ronald Reagan, that could be used, slightly changed but still used for that particular situation. Our performance, our net performance, our net profit in the separate financial statements was quite decent. That situation in this particular market will not last forever, and we are well aware of that. On the one hand, we will rebuild a unit that was consumed by fire. On the other hand, however, we had a significant supply of much cheaper titanium white from China. As a result, our diversification efforts for Police should proceed towards NOx products. Obviously, we are selling our NOx products on the wholesale market right now, but we could also sell them on a retail basis. And we are thinking about it as well. Segment by segment, we can see pretty clearly that our EBITDA was impacted negatively by our fertilizers segment, especially in terms of ammonia. However, for individual or separate price components, the situation is not that simple. We need to remember that we had a major increase of unit costs of gas, electricity, CO2 emission allowances, which currently stand at more than 20 euro. That represents a threefold increase since last year. A couple of words about fertilizers. A couple of more words about fertilizers. I have mentioned that before. EBITDA was generated at 28 million PLN with the EBITDA margin at 3%. For pigments, we had an EBITDA margin at 30%. In terms of our investments and ongoing capex projects that have a major impact or a major significance for our group and for Police in general, we have an ongoing investment project of Polymery Police, or Police polymers, which has an effect on our consolidated performance. It reduces our consolidated performance, as I said before, due to certain impact of partial impact of operational costs until that investment is completed and brought on stream. Today, we are revamping our technologies for the production of phosphoric acid, which will improve the efficiency of our production in that particular business line. This is a very promising investment. We have also completed an investment in desulfurization of flue gases. which has a measurable, concrete effects due to the elimination of certain charges for emissions of flue gases, and other mandatory or business maintenance CapEx projects that are shown on that screen. Thank you very much for your attention. And last but not least, Mr. Artur Kamiński will discuss the situation and performance at Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn. I will try to recap our situation and our performance, not to dwell too much. Despite unfavorable market trends, which have already been discussed by my colleagues, Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn we are still faring well, and we are still on the safe side. The negative trends have not been very visible. This is due to the fact that the structure of revenue at Kędzierzyn is particular. We have a OXO segment, which fares pretty well and is very promising, and it represents nearly 60% of our revenue structure. It offsets the challenging market conditions in the fertilizer segment across the group. In terms of our revenue, we saw an increase by 39 million PLN quarter on quarter. And if we compare the first half of 2017 versus 2018, our revenue also has shown a positive trend. It is not, however, reflected in our EBITDA or net profit. Our EBITDA went down to 16 million. That is a 4 million decline quarter on quarter, and by 9 million PLN if we compare the first half of 2018 to 2017. The first half of this year saw a net profit of 32 million PLN, which represented a decline by 12 million PLN year on year. The next slide, shown on screen, demonstrates a certain correlation between our EBITDA generated in the second half of 2018, that is 16.3 million, versus the second quarter of 2017. It is clear by looking at this slide that our EBITDA went down. Only our OXO segment contributed positively. However, the fertilizers segment contributed negatively in the second half of 2018, and in particular in the second quarter of 2018, by 13 million PLN. Speaking of the fertilizers segment, our performance in that particular segment in the second quarter saw a revenue of 186 million PLN, which was slightly higher than a year before. And our revenue for the entire first half of the year stands at 409, which is also higher year on year. I would like to mention at that point that our sales volumes in the second quarter of the year have also shown an increase, or increasing trend, rising trend, both for the second quarter and the first half of the year. And the same applies to other products. And despite the challenging conditions in the fertilizer segments, our sales volumes are growing. Moving on to the OXO segment, a recapitulation of our performance in this very promising and growing segment, which offsets to a large extent the challenging conditions in the fertilizer segment. In the second quarter of 2018, we saw revenue of 222 million PLN, and in the first half of the year, we saw a revenue of 463 million PLN. This particular segment fared very well, much better than a year before, which is due not only to higher volumes applied on the market or sold in the market, but also due to higher sales. Those two factors improved our performance in the OXO segment. The same applies to volumes of sales of products sold, which increased to 50,000 tons in the second quarter of 2018 from 43,000 tons. In terms of our investments, we are analyzing revision number 2 in terms, or upgrade number 2 for our CapEx plan. It will include 71 projects, and it is being currently analyzed, and we are waiting for corporate decisions, corporate consents. We are looking at more than 46 million PLN, half of which will be devoted to maintenance, and the other half will be earmarked to growth projects. I do believe that this is a well-balanced structure which will allow us to operate effectively at Kędzierzyn. Without going into much detail, I would like to mention a couple of projects, especially specialty esters, upgrade of the compression unit for synthesis gas and raw gas. The first investment that I have mentioned for esters is a growth project. The other one is a typical business maintenance project and replacement project. This will be all for Kędzierzyn. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for everybody's attention. We have presented and discussed the performance and the analysis and also the assessment of our performance for Grupa Azoty and the key in general and the key 4 companies of the group. I would like to mention again that our performance increased also in terms of the 5th major company in the group, that is Siarkopol, headquartered at Grzybowo, not to be confused with the other Siarkopol company, which is not ours. The performance at Siarkopol and the efforts we have taken at Siarkopol had a measurable effect in the company's financial performance. Those changes were pretty dynamic in terms of the composition of the management board and revamping of the management policy. Siarkopol, as a result, became an important company for the group and also for the province of Świętokrzyskie and the province of Kielce. We had this meeting was also this meeting was also available to our webcast viewers, who were able to watch us and listen to us live on the internet. I'm very happy that we had those participants. I would like to I would like to assure them that we will be delivering our strategy consistently. If you have any question and if you have any doubts that maybe we should have mentioned gasification of coal, I would like to assure you that this project is it is implemented as planned, and it will have a positive effect on our performance in the months to come and in the periods to come. Our R&D center is also, that project is also being implemented, and it proceeds as planned as well. We will be discussing this project during the next meeting. This project, the R&D Center, will be brought on stream in the second half of the year. This building will not be empty. It will include a number of units which will be brought on stream and which will contribute to our performance positively. We are also taking a lot of efforts to revamp or revise our product lines in the fertilizers segment. We want to focus on more specialty products, especially specialty fertilizers. We're trying to revamp our product offering and product portfolio by introducing modern technological solutions, and we are consistently doing that. We will inform you of the measurable effects of those efforts in due time. I would like to thank you for your attention, for your participation in the room, and also to all the webcast viewers. Thank you very much, and we will see you at the upcoming meetings, which will also be available to you over the internet. Thank you very much.